happy to talk to you, happy to see you. And it's a great pleasure to speak with you.
Likewise, I'm really excited about your new album because it's a bunch of very rare pieces, and yet all very spontaneous and full of life and energy, which is kind of your signature as a conductor. So I'm really excited about, you know, how you thought about it and everything, because it's really a nice, perfect for, you know, it's got tangos and then the unique, you know, symphony of percussion. So what made you put those ideas together? Because it's a very unique and wonderful album.
You know, it just happened. We didn't plan it this way, and it just happened. Sometimes by amazing coincidence, serendipity, like much of my life. You know, I went to a concert by the Russian National Orchestra at Lincoln Center about 2 years ago. First tour, I made many tours with them all over the world, but never to America. We went to China, to South America, and all over Europe, but I was not available for the American tour, but I went to the concert. And as I was walking out from Lincoln Center, someone came running behind me from the orchestra saying, "You might not remember me because I stand at the back of the orchestra. I'm one of the percussionists." But we were on tour in Japan last month, and I bought a score of your percussion symphony. And we love it. We like to record it. Would you let us record it? And I said, of course. It's published. Anybody can record it. And it was recorded once before by Sir John Eliot Gardiner, I never met, a long time ago, on a, it's called direct to disc. You know, between the LP and the CD was a short-lived direct to disc.
Oh, that's right.
This particular company was owned by the Beatles. One of the Beatles has started a record label. I can't remember the name of it. This is obviously a long time ago. And the record company didn't last long because then CD appeared and there was no more reason for direct to disc. Anyway, that was when the percussion symphony was recorded. But this is the first one since then, first time in digital. And if you watch them playing it on YouTube, I couldn't believe it. They play from memory. Now, pianists always often play from memory, always, in fact, but percussion is not playing actual notes, but sounds, playing from memory for 25 minutes. It's outstanding. I don't know how they did it, and it's on YouTube. You can watch it. I don't know what the title is. It doesn't say percussion symphony, whatever it says.
Anyway, Symphony of Percussion, I think.
Symphony of Percussion. So because of that, and it sounds so great, we started CD with that piece.
Wow. Well, and it's very dynamic. You know, I actually looked it up because, you know, I'm a fan of Sir John Eliot Gardiner. So I thought, well, let me look it up because it's a very rare piece. And I love it because I love the rare pieces, you know, but that's kind of your bailiwick, isn't it? The rare pieces. I mean, you broke onto the scene with some amazing conducting with Stokowski in the Ives Symphony No. 4, right? And it was just because you were there and you were interested, legitimately, organically interested in how these musical parts work, you know, and I immediately heard that. Yeah.
I happened to be there. I was just a lucky bystander. Originally, Ives wrote it with 4 conductors in mind. Stokowski said 4 is too many. I think we'll use 3. Actually, you could have done it with 2 because the third conductor only conducts in the last movement of the Ives Symphony No. 4, backstage percussion, which is unrelated to what's happening on stage. So I could have walked off from the podium on the stage and just conducted, but we had to give an opportunity to the other associate conductor. So it was done with 3 conductors.
Well, I'm very excited too to hear the premiere recordings that you have on this album, the Samson and Buddha for 2 flutes and the Colores Mágicos, the harp concerto. I love harp concertos, so there just aren't enough of them. So tell me a little bit about these world premiere pieces.
All right, so you mentioned first Samson and Buddha. We had this little dog, Maltese, called Samson, and he had a toy which he was inseparable from, we call it Buddha, I don't know why. It was a blue thing, and if you grabbed it, he became very nervous, very upset. And sometimes because it was made of cloth, my wife will fix it, and he was very upset whenever we touched it. They were inseparable. So when he died, in a car went over him, I had lent it to friends. And so I was in Boston for a week, And in the hotel room, I wrote this kind of memorial, Samson and Buddha. That's the story of it. And it's two flutes for some reason. I don't know. I kind of remember it was 3 years ago why I wrote it for two. Well, probably because I didn't have music paper. So I took hotel stationery and drew staffs. You know, it's quite a lot of work. I didn't have a ruler either. I had to use a magazine to make rules. And I wrote, so two flutes was easier than orchestra, which would take forever. It's a good piece. It's been played a few times. The premiere of this piece was organized by Gabriel Prokofiev's grandson.
Oh, I know Gabriel. Yes,
you know,
he's wonderful.
He's a wonderful guy and a very friendly and very talented composer himself. We are very good friends from the whole family. So he heard about this piece. He arranged for the premiere in London and New York. But this is the first recording. The other piece you mentioned is the harp concerto.
Yeah.
Colores Mágicos. And this I wrote when I was with Zell, George Zell, as composer in residence for the Cleveland Orchestra. After when Stokowski announced he was going back to England, he was by then middle or late 90s, and he wanted to go back home. So I accepted Zell's invitation to go to Cleveland, but not as assistant conductor because there were too many. Pierre Boulez was on his first job, as his title was principal guest conductor. He had Shaw as associate conductor, the famous choral conductor.
Oh,
and he had two other associate conductors, brilliant men, two other associates and about six assistants, including the co-winner of the competition. The reason he was interested in me is I won this conductors competition sponsored by the Ford Foundation in Baltimore. And the co-winner was James Levine. So he invited us both to go there as assistants. James accepted, I stayed with Stokowski. A year later, I wrote to Maestro Zell asking, was the opportunity still open? He said, it's no opportunity. You would never get to conduct as an assistant conductor. How about coming as composer in residence? And he wrote to the Rockefeller Foundation. They gave me half the grant, the other half the orchestra, and I spent 2 wonderful years. I felt funny about accepting that title because I hadn't been composing for years, for reasons that I didn't have writers, what do you call it when you have writers that they sit in front of the typewriter and nothing comes out.
Copywriters or
yeah, whatever it's called. I didn't have that. It was simply that my music, which is not tonal but quasi-tonal, even when I write 12-tone music, it sounds almost tonal. I didn't feel comfortable writing music of those days when it was Penderecki was very much involved with notes which not really musical but sound effects and all that.
Yeah, it was a strange period for new composition.
Strange period. So, you know, I mean, not to compare myself in any way, but two of the great composers of the 20th century, Rachmaninoff and Sibelius, and Glazunov, three, stopped composing 3 ways into their careers because they felt early 20th century, in the 1920s or so, uncomfortable writing late romantic music in those days after Schoenberg and Stravinsky. So in a similar way, later on in the end of the 20th century, I didn't feel comfortable until I went to Cleveland, and Wilma Salisbury, the critic of the Cleveland Plain Dealer newspaper, wrote an article once, front page of the Plain Dealer, saying that instead of sitting at home composing, I was traveling all over the world conducting. It was the beginning of my so-called international conducting career. It was true, but it hit home. So I thought I better get going. and then I had a conversation with one of the double bass players of the Cleveland Orchestra, a wonderful lady, who said I should meet an inventor who lived in Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, who invented an amazing machine which transforms sounds into images, colorful images. So Stanley Elliott, E-L-L-I-O-T. I said, absolutely, let's go there. So I went there, and he played for me, put some records on. He put, I remember, Holst, Planets, and other things with exotic orchestrations. and the machine suddenly came alive, and it was all kinds of colors and images, non-created, just reacting to it. I was fascinated. So that, at the same time, I had a commission from Philadelphia, from Samuel Rosenbaum, who was a member of the board of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he had married not long before Edna Phillips, a legendary harp soloist of the Cleveland Orchestra. He had a commission before, Alberto Ginastera, his fantastic harp concerto. And
yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Fantastic work.
Yeah.
And so he remembered me from being a student at Curtis Institute in Philadelphia and wrote to me just at the same time, would I be interested in doing a harp concerto for Edna? And I combined the two things. And I went back to see Mr. Elliott, this inventor, and I said, how will the machine react to the harp? He said, better than for any instrument. The harmonics, the vibration makes the machine go crazy. So we put some harp music and the machine was all over the place. That was it. I was hooked. I wrote one of my first 12-tone, my second 12-tone piece, and very experimental in some ways, in that the harpist is the only one on stage. The orchestra is in the pit, like an opera.
Oh, wow.
And projections are all over the place. So we premiered it in Washington, the Inter-American Music Festival at the time. And it was an instant success, perhaps because of the unusualness of the whole situation. The harpist was Heidi Liewalder, who was also a student at Curtis at the time. Edna Phillips no longer played the harp, she retired. So she nominated this fantastic student, professional, just graduated like me from Curtis at the time, and she did the premiere. So Stanley Elliott told me, I have a second machine, the sister or brother of the Chrysoma. This is one, it's a tiny thing, like a small antique TV set, and uses slides. I put a slide where I paint some modern things, and when the music starts, it goes all over the place. It becomes alive. So we use that machine as well. We had Heidi Liewalder wear a white suit, and we projected on her as she played. So it was a projection on her and the big projection on the large screen. Well, the public just couldn't have enough of it. The critic loved it, whoever was the critic of the Washington Post. My only worry, he said, is if you have to transport all this machinery around. And Sam Rosenbaum also, he said, how will you do this? I said, I don't know. But soon enough, the machines became obsolete because discotheques and conventions began to use more digital images without the need to engage this.
Yeah.
But here, not long after, maybe a year after, Gerald Arpino, the main choreographer for the Joffrey Ballet, decided to make a ballet of this music. And it became a ballet called Orpheus Times Light. I conducted the premiere in New York, and then he toured all over the United States. So it's published both ways, as a harp concerto and as a ballet score. So that's my second. Then I did, at the same time, I was still conducting a small semi-professional orchestra, a very good one in New Jersey called the Plainfield Symphony, the oldest orchestra in New Jersey and the second oldest orchestra in America after the New York Philharmonic.
Wow.
And, in my early days, I wanted to conduct, so I accepted and I remained faithful to them for as long as I could take it. And they, to celebrate their 50th anniversary, way back then, they commissioned me to write a double bass concerto because Gary Carr, who is the great star of double bass players all over the world, K-A-R-R, is a genius of double bass.
Very admirable work too, because the bass is crazy.
Yeah,
crazy.
So he lived in Plainfield. So they commissioned me to write, to celebrate the orchestra's 50th anniversary, a double bass concerto featuring Gary Carr. So I did experiment in which the brass is in the balcony and all kinds of things like that. That was recorded recently by Gary with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. So that's a long answer to a kind of question.
Well, I think it's interesting that, you know, back then that you were looking at these experimental techniques, right? Because those performance techniques now are much needed, right? The symphony hall has become kind of dull through a sense of poverty that I feel a lot of orchestras have. They don't feel like they can do anything besides play to like a motion picture, right? Like a movie like Harry Potter or something like that. When there's these like cool devices that existed already that we can recreate now in spades with much more electronic sensitivity to create vibrations, you know, a la Fantasia, right? For the audience, you know. And I love the experimentation of moving the orchestra around, especially now, you know, in the time of COVID. So I've always loved this about your work, you know, because I think you really just want the music to appeal to people, to really entertain. And that's what I think that's really the hallmark of this album, is that you've got a lot of really nice, you know, forward-looking pieces mixed with some really great tangos and some really you know, fundamental works of yours. And I'm very excited about it. To hear it. Yeah, no, bravo. And that's coming out on the 7th, correct?
Of May. This
May.
month, yes, 7th of May. That's just a few days.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. The idea for making this record was not mine at all. It was my main music publishers.
Oh, okay.
But how it formed, how it combined pieces, it just happened. Like the percussion was there, they recorded it, we helped and we made it. And then a few other things also just fit into it. And it turned out to be a compendium of my works from early on to my latest things. It was not, it coincides with the book coming out soon, which is also a story that way.
Yeah, let's talk about the book, because I've read the primer and I can't wait to get a copy, because I totally want to make sure that it gets out there for people to see and read. So we're going to probably rebroadcast this interview at the time. So what would you want people to say? What would you want people, I mean, to know about the book? Because it seems, you know, it's kind of, it seems like a great overview of your stories and your history and your life and the places where you kind of put your oar in, you know, to bring the musical language to make sense, you know, for the audience always. So how do you feel about it? You know, having all these stories put into print, you know, some reviews from some of the quotes I've read look like it's really you know, giving people the intricacies of how you worked and why you worked.
That's a very interesting question indeed. You know, when the original writer was Michel FAURÉ, the original book is in French, came out 20 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Michel FAURÉ, it's a grandson of composer.
Yeah.
He came to a concert of mine and came backstage afterwards and told me he wanted to write a book about me. And he was very offended when I turned him down, because I didn't see the need for it. And I said, you know, he said, well, look, take this book and look at it. He wrote a book about Pierre Boulez before, which was very damning. I mean, I said, I don't want another. He was a critic. He's now in his 90s, but he was a very tough music critic, Michel FAURÉ, when he was writing reviews. Yeah. So I thought, you know, thank you, no thanks. So then he explained, and that made it possible for me. The reason he wanted to write a book about me at that stage, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, was through me to find out about some of the amazing artists of the 20th century that I was one way or another related to working with. Yeah. First of all, Bohuslav Martinou, who helped me to come to the United States, Aaron Copland, my first real composition teacher, then Stokowski, who kind of discovered me, I guess, playing my first symphony when I was a teenager, and then naming me associate conductor and so on. Then George Zell, who spoke about the moment ago, invited me, and a few others. Different cymbalist at Curtis, the great violinist of the old hour school, and even he had read a note someplace about my adventures with Salvador Dali, which are very humorous in some instances.
I'm sure with Dali, what else?
Yeah, you can imagine, but wait till you read it. It's not to be believed. So Michel FAURÉ said, look, it's not so much about you, don't worry. It's through you to find out about these great artists, your experiences with them, and so on and so on. In that case, go ahead. So we corresponded and so on. But in the process of doing that, he found out there's an interesting story from his point of view about me as well. The way I started in South America and somehow made my way, or I was invited to the United States by Copeland, Normandy, Howard Hanson. He wanted to be my teacher. I had the option of going to Curtis Institute, Philadelphia, to study with Martineau, or Rochester Eastman School with Howard Hanson. Wow. And I had a very hard time to decide because I loved his music. I had studied his Romantic Symphony No. 2, but I decided Philadelphia for family reasons. When my family came from Russia, they all moved to Philadelphia. I have about 300 cousins there. So I thought Philadelphia, I'll feel at home. So that's how and Bohuslav Martineau wrote me the most beautiful letter saying, it'll be a pleasure to have you study. By the way, by the time I arrived in Philadelphia, Martineau was gone. So I'll tell you one of the anecdotes, one of the 1,000 anecdotes in the book. It's mostly anecdotes in the book. Martineau left me a short letter saying, I'm sorry, I won't be here to meet you personally and to work with you, but I can't stand it here anymore. That article was published. There is a Martineau library in Czech Republic, and they published it once. It's a strange letter because he said, in those days, the train from New York, he also taught at Juilliard, Bohuslav Martineau. You know, he was one of the great 20th century composers alongside Bartók and many others of that period.
That's right.
They were very lucky to have him. And the train from New York to Philadelphia took about 4.5 hours in those days and was not reliable. Sometimes he will arrive late. So he will get his check at the end of the month, sometimes reduced by 50 cents in those days. 1956 was much more than now. Sometimes reduced by $4, sometimes $12. So he went to see the head of the school. What is this? I don't mind. I don't really need it, but I don't understand it. Well, on February 12, you were 20 minutes late. On March 16, you were 11 minutes late.
No.
So he said, no, thank you, but no. He applied for a Guggenheim fellowship. He got it, of course. He left Juilliard and Curtis, went to Switzerland and never came back. So he wrote me a letter explaining that. So one of the many things that happen in life.
It's one of those weird things, though, because you uproot your whole life. You know, for the artist, this happens more frequently than people know, right? You uproot your whole life, you move to a city to be with a teacher, or it doesn't work out, or they've decided they don't want to be there anymore, and you really bond with that teacher, right? Then their ideas and how they work and the music they write, and then they're gone, and here you are, you're in Philadelphia.
Incredible. You know, but I had a great teacher who became my friend, best friend and mentor, Vittorio Giannini. Giannini, you know, he wrote wonderful operas, and his sister was a very famous singer at the time, and we became very, very good friends. He and his wife often invited me to dinner when I came to New York. We became friends. He was already totally opposite from me musically. He wrote very, very traditional music, post-Verdi even, very, very wonderful music. He should be played more, but I was already in the next stage. And I remember when my piano sonata, which is in this recording, the new record, is a world premiere recording, I was one of my graduation pieces. It was played by Rudolf Serkin. He was already about to become president of Curtis, and he played the premiere at my graduation, which is incredible. But I was considered by people, I could sense it, and listening to my piano sonata, I was considered an enfant terrible, you know, very modern, because Giannini was writing well, like Menotti and Barber long before, you know, very traditional, wonderful but traditional music. Mm-hmm. And now listening to my piano sonata because of this recording, right, which is a terrific performance by Mrs. Pachenko, is very traditional. You know, it's very mid-20th century. But in those days, 1958, in Philadelphia, I guess they thought it was outrageously modern.
Isn't that funny?
Very funny. Anyways, the premiere of that is recorded now. It's a very good piece. I like it.
Who recorded it again? Because I'm going to go listen to it again.
Nadia Shpachenko. I never met her, but she already knew it, and she did a fantastic performance of it, amazing performance. So did Serkin at the time. He was, he played with the score, but it was quite something.
Oh, there's nothing he couldn't play.
Of course, it's my only solo piano work. So that's
excellent. I'm really excited to get the book and read it, because it's these stories that bond the music community together. You're kind of like the Kevin Bacon. Do you know the story? Kevin Bacon, they have this thing, 6 degrees of separation. Like we're all a few people away from knowing the Queen of England because the world is so small. And I always kind of imagine you as that to the classical world in America, in particular, because you bonded so many, you've worked across so many groups, bonded with so many conductors and composers, really trying to get their language out there. And you're like the ultimate translator. You're like, okay, yeah, we'll conduct it. Well, it needs words, or, you kind of come in and you put your mind to it and make it better. And I love that about you. And I think, I think that's what I always hear in your stories, and like that. So it's kind of like, thinking of that, I really wanted to bring this question to you, because, here we are in COVID, we have all these orchestras that don't know what to do. They've played Beethoven to death. They've played Bach and Brahms to death. What should modern symphonies do to be as engaged as you are as a conductor, as profound musicians are, wanting to bring that idea to the audience?
Well, that's a marvelous way to put it, really, to be relevant. At the end of this book, by the way, the book is being officially published on the 15th of August, but it's already available. I don't know how that works, but it is. I saw it in Amazon this morning.
So it's available for order.
I guess to pre-order or something. Anyway, at the end of it, I wrote for the original book 20 years ago, postlude, in which I talked exactly about that, even long before the pandemic, 20 years before the pandemic, how to make orchestras, classical music in general, relevant to the general public. Even in my years in Cleveland, all those years ago, I noticed the public already then, wonderful, but aging public, not being renovated by people even in the 40s or much less younger. New York is different, or London or Moscow, when I conduct there. London, you have younger audiences, or Scandinavia. Sometimes at the end of my concert, I see 60 or more young girls coming to get an autograph. I mean, by that, I mean 12, 13-year-old girls. I guess a school arranging, but it's an adult concert. It was fantastic. Also in China, in my many tours in China, I see an enormous amount of, for them it's still relatively new, the classical Western, so-called classical music. So it's a discovery. But in our country here, the public is not being replaced sufficiently. So how to become relevant for orchestras and similar ensembles? And I'm not the one to give ideas on how to do it, but the principle of trying to become relevant is crucial. Now, one of the few advantages, if you can call it, out of this pandemic, this terrible thing that has made it everybody, but in my cases, I feel especially the artists, performers, orchestras, is that everyone has discovered the way to really communicate via the internet.
Yeah.
That may continue. Even my school, Curtis Institute, fantastic school, one of the best music schools ever. Every graduation now, you can watch it on TV. Everyone who graduates gets exposure, which may help to get performances, the management. The world is there. So that's new. And that wouldn't have happened, perhaps, if it was not thanks to the pandemic, that made everybody go online. So the online participation may somehow continue. That's one of the advantages. I feel especially worried and concerned about private orchestras. All these 4 amazing orchestras in London. They're private. Many people here, even in the music world, are not aware of it. The London Philharmonic, London Symphony, Philharmonia, and Royal Philharmonic, they have no salaries. They only earn money when they perform or record. So this last year has been absolutely devastating for them.
Wow.
And the same thing for the numerous chamber orchestras. The one I work with the most is the English Chamber Orchestra. Records and many tours with them. I took them a year ago, just before the pandemic, end of January. We went to Scotland and Ireland for the second year in a row. I was probably one of the last concerts they did. Now they do concerts online whenever it seems possible.
Yeah.
Same thing with St. Martin in the Fields and many of the other first-rate chamber orchestras in London. They have this problem. So how to move forward with orchestras, let's say in America and so on? They are discovering ways to Stokowski had this marvelous idea. He was always full of ideas. When I was working with him a long time ago in New York at Carnegie Hall with the American Symphony Orchestra, yep. One of his main main things to do was what he called teenage concerts, not children concerts, but teenage concerts, which he had started when he was in Philadelphia. So he arranged through the municipality, the city, to have high schools send buses to Carnegie Hall to fill the entire hall twice a day, let's say 10 in the morning to 11 and then 12 to 1. And he will conduct the opening piece and the last piece, and I was assigned by him to conduct all the middle pieces. The most difficult assignment of my life, because he stood on a bass stool, on a bar stool, right next to me, to my left, while I conducted my pieces. And one of the funny things happened, he didn't use batons, as you know, he had these marvelous hand gestures. Yeah. But just to show I was a main influence, I used the baton, very proudly so, just to show my own name. So when he came his turn to conduct at the end of, after I finished, he picked up the baton with complete disgust in his face and handed it to me. He had taken that back. He hated batons. He felt it was just a piece of wood with no expressiveness, while the hand can express more. So those concerts were amazing. He will say to the students, please write to us, write to me and to him and to the orchestra members. And we will get thousands of letters. Sometimes a classroom will send a letter. It was the same letter signed by 30 different students, all copied from each other. But all that, and then he said, tell your parents to come to our evening adult concerts and tell them to bring you. You are already teenagers. You should come to concerts. That was fantastic. Nothing like that has happened since, except of course the famous Leonard Bernstein's youth concerts.
Yeah, on the television.
Were fantastic. They were televised, and without talking down to the young audiences. On the contrary, he brought them to his level. But there is nothing quite like it. Pop concerts help. It brings an audience that otherwise feel is too highbrow. But there are many ways to appeal to a younger audience to keep it going.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that right now has to be planned in order to bring back the next generation of public. It's up to the parents as well. You know, many parents, I remember a good friend of mine was head of NET, National Educational Television, the predecessor of PBS. He was the head of it and a very good friend of mine. Yeah. And he was a great music lover. He wrote a book about Stokowski, by the way, which was never published. And I asked him once, why didn't he bring his kids to concerts? He went to concerts all the time, never once introduced his children to concerts. He said, I didn't think they would be interested. So anyway, that's something to be considered.
It always blows my mind. You know, there's so many people in power with great funding who could, you know, really propel things forward, you know, like athletes and celebrities. They're all engaged in politics, but the politics is always going to be there. You know, keeping orchestras alive, fueling orchestras with audience, because I think a lot of people forget that, you know, the orchestra will respond to the audience if the audience will talk to the orchestra, right? It's like, right?
That's absolutely. You know, I was conducting in Scotland 2 years ago. I go there all the time in Glasgow, the wonderful orchestra. This is the orchestra which I recorded the complete Glazunov cycle, all the symphonies. national, Royal National Scottish or Royal Scottish National Orchestra.
Yeah.
The day before, my friend, who was then the chairman of the orchestra, like here would be the chairman of the society patronizing the orchestra, wonderful man, not a musician. He was head of Reuters at the time, the news agency. He took me to dinner purposely with the purpose, said, please talk to the audience. He said, before the concert or near the concert, will you address the audience? Anything comes to mind about the music, just to get that proximity that you're not in another world. And I said, I love that. Bernstein did it all the time. Remember, Leonard Bernstein was famous for it. And I remember Harold Schoenberg, the critic of the New York Times, criticized him for it. I remember, because, but Bernstein had a special knack of doing it.
Oh, yeah.
So I did it at this concert with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. I spoke to them briefly, but I informally made them laugh about something. The next day, the critic there said, what's going on? This is the third conductor who addresses the audience. Why not just make music? I guess the traditions take a long time to die. But yes, try to create a warmth with the audience. I think one of the things Bernstein did, I never forgot, when he played, I think it was Beethoven's Emperor Concerto, number 5, with the New York Philharmonic with Gould, Glenn Gould as soloist, one of the last times he played in public. And Bernstein announced to the public, we don't agree on this. It was a Brahms Concerto, number 2. We don't agree on the tempi. I feel it one way, he feels it one way. He's a great artist, I admire him, we don't need to argue. So we're going to play it twice. Once my tempo and one his tempo. This is Schoenberg's review, which was magical. He said, so they played it twice. And you know what he wrote? They sounded the same to me. That was an amazing thing. That's how conductors with a soloist, they have to agree. Ideally, the conductor will follow the soloist's interpretation, unless he or she has a firm idea of how it should sound. Right. Usually it's a compromise.
Totally. Well, I got to thank you so much for your time. This conversation has already inspired me. That's why I needed to reach out to you when I got the announcement about the new album and everything, because last time we spoke, I left our conversation feeling more inspired about my position in the world of music, which is something I think that you do for many people, in the orchestra, among your aides and helpers and stuff, and so I'm just really, I'm really thrilled to be able to talk to you about this stuff. So I appreciate your time. If there was one thing you could say to aspiring conductors and composers, what would that one thing be?
It's different for both different. For conductors, I would say the most important thing, and it's missed in many, I guess most young conductors, is try to observe the work of experienced. When I went to Curtis, I was studying violin and composition, but I went to see the head of Curtis, Efren Zimbalist, to say, I really want to study conducting. He said, you can't study conducting. He said, either you are, or look, the great conductors like you, Björn Monteux, my young teacher, Anton Doherty, Leopold Stokowski, Arturo Toscanini, he said, never studied conducting. They became conductors. So I didn't agree. I told him in a nice way, respectful way. I said, look, why can't one learn from other people's experience rather than to reinvent the wheel? There are many things that they learn as they went along that can be passed along to the next generation. He said, well, we did have a great conducting teacher, Fritz Reiner, who taught Bernstein at Curtis. Right. But since Fritz Reiner left to go to Chicago, then we decided it's not necessary. All right, so I wrote to the State Department. I was on a State Department scholarship to come to America. Just very unusual scholarship, was specially invented. I complained. I said, I'd like to study conducting. So they wrote to Normandy, and he arranged for his wonderful assistant conductor, Smith. He gave me some marvelous advice with weekly conducting lessons. So conductor, my advice is to watch seasoned conductors rehearse. For rehearsal technique is a key element. And most of all is the basis. Study harmony, counterpoint, orchestration, a string instrument if possible. The basis, but it's a lifetime. It's like, one of the most cleverest things that Sir Simon Rattle said when he was 59, he had an interview with the New York Times. He was not yet totally known. He said, I don't know what the question was, but he said, no conductor below 60 should be taken seriously. And he was 59 at the time. What he meant is a lifetime learning experience. For composers, it's something else. It's learning all techniques, harmony, counterpoint, everything that even though they don't apply necessarily today, but it's the basis. You cannot skip the basis unless you have them.
That's right. Yeah, and you have to know the sonorities you're making. You just do. Well, thank you, Maestro. This has been brilliant, and I wish you every great happiness in your future, which I think is still going to be quite long.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you. All the best to you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Pleasure.